Donald Trump's main foreign policy tool, but the U.S. president must still face the same economic reality as other leaders around the world. Joining me in studio now is David Oliver, public affairs strategist and founder of Minerva Strategy. David, thank you for being here.
Good morning.
So we are close now, about a week away, I guess, from the date on which Trump once again could impose 25% tariffs on Canadian products being shipped into the United States. He extended us a 1-month reprieve as we convinced him we were making some progress on the border and other issues. What's your take on where we stand right now, and how likely is it that the full brunt of these tariffs will land about a week from now?
Well, I mean, this is the $64,000 million question. We've had some snippets of things that have come from in the last couple of weeks. I think we had. He was on Air Force One with some journalists, I think, a week ago, and said that he was also then talking about extending tariffs to things like lumber, which is obviously big interest for us. Automotive, I think, is very interesting. I think that's one of the most interesting areas for us to look at between the US and Canada. Mm-hmm. He also talks about pharmaceuticals and chips. But that was it. I mean, we've not had any definitive information really on what he intends to do since he gave that reprieve back at the beginning of the month and coming into the end of the month this month.
Canada's great hope, or one of the great hopes of Canada, is that business leaders in the United States will say, look, this will have a negative effect on the economy at large and our businesses in particular. You've got to rethink your position on this. There's been some evidence of this. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which gets described as the biggest business organization in the world, has said exactly that. We've heard that there are state governors and state legislators who are representing states that have Canada as a very significant buyer of their products, saying the same thing. How much momentum do you think that movement has in the U.S. right now?
Yeah, I mean, on the political side, I think it's interesting you're talking about that, because we've not heard a lot, really, actually, from the border state, either governors, senators, or congressional officials. And, you know, will they have a weight on Donald Trump? I'm sure a lot of them are very nervous about some of the potential impacts of tariffs and how it affects particularly their communities, a lot of which have Trump voters. How much that will be feeding through to Trump, we don't know. I mean, Trump is a very mercurial figure. Mm-hmm. What I do think are the three things he pays attention to, though, are the stock market, inflation, and consumer sentiment. Mm-hmm. And when you said at the beginning that he can't ignore the other things that other leaders do, those are three things he can't control, in the sense of the figures on that are the figures that come through. And we've had some very concerning figures, I think, on inflation last week. We've had some very concerning figures, particularly on consumer sentiment. I think I saw that 38% of the basket of goods that go into CPI are more than 5% up. And of course, we've got the famous story about eggs in the US as well. And I think when we went back to the original tariffs announcement back at the beginning of the month, the stock market had a pretty negative reaction to that. And as much as we know any of the reasons for Donald Trump deciding not to go ahead with those, and you know whether Justin Trudeau convinced him and Claudia Sheinbaum convinced him with particular measures, that we suspect was one of the big measures that reined him in.
So if these tariffs land, I think everybody will be watching the monthly inflation report in the U.S. More closely than usual. They watch it very closely already if they're involved or participating in markets. I know you're not an economist, but take a crack at this question anyway. When do you think, if the tariffs would be inflationary, how many months would need to pass before we saw a very material uptick in U.S. inflation?
And again, it is a complicated question to ask, because it depends which tariffs they go on. And obviously, it's a very dynamic system to understand. I think we can broadly, most economists, as much as economists will ever agree on anything, would agree that if you put the cost of your imports up, that is going to lead to inflation. Anything that increases a price, which a tariff does, is going to lead to inflation. If it's blanket, then clearly that's going to be a big impact immediately. If it's more targeted, then that's when it's going to be a little bit more subtle for us to start to read how that starts to impact different things. And, you know, if we look at this eggs example, there's also other things that can come in and affect inflation that weren't expected, and that's a big avian flu crisis. They've had to backpedal on sacking all of those government officials that Elon Musk has got rid of. And so there's other things that are going on as well, which could be inflationary too. Okay, I know you're watching the German elections as well. What do you make of the fact that the AfD, the far-right party, came in second in that election? What's it telling us about the mood of European electorates? Yeah, and that in of itself was expected. We were expecting them to come in around about the 20% mark, and they've got, I think, a quarter of the seats as a result of the German system for that. If you look at the electoral map, their hinterland of the East has grown. I mean, if you look at actually almost the boundaries of the old East Germany, that is now strong AfD territory apart from Berlin. And it tells us that the things that voters were concerned about, particularly high immigration, but also the German economy. The German economy basically hasn't grown for 6 years. and people aren't feeling good about things, and that is leading through to this, if you call it a protest vote, whatever you might do, but the AfD is shoring up its vote as a result of that.
So the AfD will not be part of a governing coalition,
no.
correct? Because
no.
the established parties have said we will not do that.
Correct.
Who does the conservative leading party has won? They've got to partner up with somebody to form a majority. They're going to partner with the socialists, I gather?
Yeah, so the idea is there will be what would be called a grand coalition, and it's called that because it would, in theory, be the two biggest parties, but of course the socialists aren't. They had a terrible night. They're now the third biggest party, so it'll be some sort of coalition that Friedrich Merz will pull together. The interesting thing is the smaller parties didn't get the 5% vote, and so actually that gives the bigger parties more seats, which in theory makes forming a coalition easier. He set a date of the 20th of April to have that coalition in place, and he would formally become Chancellor at that point. And there will be a lot of horse trading to go between here and there, as well as a huge crisis obviously going on to resolve around Ukraine over the next week as well. So lots going on.
David, thank you for joining us. David Oliver, Public Affairs Strategist.